The wind on Vex 4 did not just blow. It screamed, carrying with it shards of oxidized iron that could strip the paint off a standard-issue rover in less than 10 hours. Jalen Reeve adjusted the seal on his rebreather, wincing as the gritty sound of sand grinding against the gasket vibrated through his jaw. He was half buried in the carcass of a crashed heavy lifter, his gloved hands working deftly to pry a fusion coil loose from the engine housing. This was his life now. 3 years of scavenging on a rock that appeared on no commercial star charts. 3 years of breathing recycled air that tasted like stale copper and drinking water that never quite lost the chemical tang of filtration. He was a commander once, decorated with the Solar Star and the Terran Laurel. Now, he was just a ghost haunting a graveyard of machinery, selling scrap to smugglers who charged him 400% markup on protein paste. He grunted, leveraging his pry bar against the fused metal. With a snap that echoed inside his helmet, the coil broke free. It was heavy, warm to the touch, and worth enough to keep his life support running for another 2 months. Jalen slid the coil into his mag pack and climbed out of the wreckage. He stood on the ridge of the crater, looking out over the desolate landscape. The twin suns were setting, casting long, blood-red shadows across the dunes. It was peaceful in a way that death was peaceful, absolute and unyielding. Then, the silence broke. It was not a sound at first. It was a vibration, a thrumming in the marrow of his bones that made his teeth ache. The dust suspended in the air stopped moving, held in place by a sudden, crushing static charge. Jalen checked his wrist comp. The display flickered and died. His heads-up display winked out, leaving him with only the analog view through his visor. Every light in his small encampment down in the valley. The perimeter fence, the atmospheric condensers, the distress beacon he kept dark but powered, simultaneously extinguished. He looked up. The sky above Vex 4 was usually a haze of purple and orange. Now, it was black. Not the black of night, but the black of an object so massive it blotted out the nebula. It emerged from null space not with a bang, but with a tear, as if reality itself were fabric being ripped apart. The vessel was impossibly large. It stretched from one horizon to the other, a sleek, predatory spearhead of obsidian metal that seemed to absorb the dying light of the suns. It was not built in the blocky utilitarian aesthetic of the Terran Imperium, nor the bulbous organic shapes of the trade guilds. This was ancient. This myth was made manifest. Along the hull, lines of violet energy ignited, tracing complex angular runes that Jalen had not seen in 20 years. They pulsed like a heartbeat, slow and rhythmic. Jalen dropped to his knees, not out of reverence, but because the sudden gravity displacement generated by the ship's mass nearly flattened him. He gasped, his lungs struggling against the pressure. "Kurai," he whispered, the word tasting like ash in his mouth. Impossible. The Kurai were gone, extinguished, their fleets turned to dust, their worlds glassed, their royal lines severed. That was the history the Imperium taught. That was the victory Jalen had bled for, the lie he had eventually been discarded for questioning. The comlink in his helmet, shielded and analog, crackled to life. It should not have been working. The pulse had fried everything digital. But this signal was overriding the hardware itself, vibrating the speakers through sheer output power. "This is Sector Command to all vessels," a voice screamed, panic stripping away any semblance of military discipline. "Code black, code black. Unknown capital ship in orbit. It is. God, it's reading off the charts. Shields are ineffective. Repeat, shields are..." The voice cut out, replaced by a hum that resonated in Jalen's skull. A projection manifested in front of him. It was not coming from his suit. It was being projected directly into the air from the ship miles above. a hard-light hologram standing amidst the swirling dust of the moon. It was a woman. She sat upon a throne of woven metal that looked sharp enough to cut. Her skin was the color of deep ocean water, bioluminescent markings glowing softly along her cheekbones and down her neck. From the back of her head, neural tendrils, the signature of the Kurai nobility, drifted like underwater flora, crowning her in a living halo. Her eyes were solid pools of indigo, devoid of sclera or pupil, yet burning with a terrible, focused intelligence. Jalen stopped breathing. He knew that face. He knew the curve of that jaw, even if it had hardened. He knew the way she held her chin, tilted slightly up, defiant even when the universe was crushing her. "Citizens of the Imperium," she said. Her voice was melodic but carried the weight of a collapsing star. It echoed across the valley, across the sector, likely across the entire quadrant. "You sleep in homes built on the ashes of my people. You feast on the harvest of worlds you stole. You have forgotten the treaty. You have forgotten the price of your peace." The hologram leaned forward. The massive ship above groaned, the sound like tectonic plates shifting. "But I," Verelikai said, her indigo eyes seeming to lock directly onto Jalen, "have not." The transmission ended, and the darkness returned, heavier than before. The memory hit Jalen harder than the gravity wave. 20 years ago, the Imperial Academy on Terra Prime. It was a fortress of white marble and gold filigree, designed to make the cadets feel like gods and the visitors feel like insects. Jalen was 22, a newly commissioned lieutenant, full of propaganda and the naive belief that the Imperium was the shield of humanity. He had been assigned to the diplomatic security detail, a glorified babysitting job for the guest wards. Varela was 16 then. She was small, her blue skin pale from lack of sunlight, her neural tendrils short and clipped, a mark of humiliation forced upon her by the headmaster. She was not a princess in that place. She was a specimen. A hostage ensures the good behavior of a remnant Kurai faction on the edge of the galaxy. He found her in the hydroponic gardens, the only place in the academy that smelled of life. She was surrounded by 3 senior cadets, sons of admirals and governors. They were laughing, tossing a sphere between them. It was her respirator. She needed a specific mixture of nitrogen to breathe comfortably in Terra's oxygen-rich atmosphere. Without it, she was slowly suffocating, gasping for air like a fish on a deck. "Please," she wheezed, her knees buckling. "Give it. Back." "Speak Terran alien," the tallest cadet sneered, holding the device out of reach. "Beg in our tongue." Jalen did not think. He did not calculate the political fallout. He stepped out from the shadow of the archway. "That is enough," Jalen said, his voice cracking like a whip. The cadets turned, sneering. "Back off. Reeve, this doesn't concern the lower ranks. We are just teaching the guests some manners." "She is dying," Jalen said, stepping between them and the girl. He held out his hand. "The device. Now." The tall cadet laughed and dropped the respirator, crushing it beneath his boot. "Oops." The sound of the plastic shattering snapped something inside Jalen. He moved with the fluid aggression of a shock trooper. A palm strike to the solar plexus dropped the tall cadet. A sweep of the leg took down the second. The third scrambled back, eyes wide. Jalen ignored them. He dropped to his knees beside Varela. She was convulsing, her blue skin turning a sickly gray. "Breathe," he said, panic rising in his chest. He fumbled for his own emergency supply, tearing the mask off his belt. It wasn't the right mix, but it was pure oxygen. It would keep her conscious. He pressed it over her face. She flinched violently, terrified, her hands coming up to claw at him. "I am not going to hurt you," he said, his voice soft. contrasting the violence he had just dealt. "Virella, look at me. I am not them." She froze, her indigo eyes wide with terror, searched his face. She saw the fear in his own eyes, fear for her, not of her. Slowly, her hands lowered. She took a ragged breath, the oxygen flooding her system. He reached out to steady her, his hand brushing against her cheek. Her skin was cool, smooth as polished stone. She did not pull away. For a moment, amidst the ruined plants and the moaning cadets, they were the only two people in the universe. "Thank you," she whispered. The consequences were immediate. A court-martial, a dishonorable discharge. He was stripped of rank and pension, branded a sympathizer to non-human combatants. They threw him out of the military he loved, and he spent the next 2 decades drifting further and further into the dark. But he never forgot the way she looked at him. He never forgot that he was the only one who saw her not as a monster or a prize, but as a girl far from home. A spray of gravel against his helmet visor snapped Jalen back to the present. He scrambled down the side of the crater, sliding towards his camp. The Dreadnought hung in the sky like a sword of Damocles, silent and terrible. But Jalen had a more immediate problem. His perimeter sensors were dead, but his instincts were screaming. The wind had shifted. It wasn't just the storm anymore. He reached the wreckage of his habitat module just as the first shot rang out. A bolt of plasma seared the air inches from his head, melting a hole through the metal plating of the lifter he used for cover. Jalen rolled, coming up with his modified coil rifle raised. "Who's there?" he shouted, his voice amplified by his suit's external speakers. 3 figures emerged from the dust storm. They wore the distinct heavy armor of the Guild Bounty Corps, red plating, jagged silhouettes, and optics glowing a predatory green. "Jalen Reeve," the leader boomed, his voice digitized. "The Imperium has placed a reinstatement on your death warrant. 10,000 credits, dead or alive, though given the current situation in the sky, we prefer death, less luggage." "You idiots," Jalen yelled, ducking as another plasma bolt slagged the rock beside him. "Look up. Do you see what is parking in orbit? We are all going to die if you don't get to a shelter." "The big ship?" The bounty hunter laughed, a harsh metallic sound. "Just means the Empire will be distracted. Makes it easier to clean up trash like you." They advanced, firing in a suppressing pattern. Jalen returned fire, his coil rifle thumping rhythmically, sending slugs of tungsten slamming into their shields. He dropped one hunter with a shot to the knee joint, but the other 2 kept coming. He was pinned. His ammo counter read 12 rounds. He was tired. He was old. And he was going to die in the dirt of a forgotten moon, killed by greedy fools while the apocalypse watched from above. "End of the line. Traitor," the leader said, stepping over the debris, leveling a heavy cannon at Jalen's chest. Jalen closed his eyes. He thought of the academy. He thought of the cool touch of blue skin. "At least I tried," he thought. A sound tore through the atmosphere, a high-pitched whine that escalated into a roar. A beam of violet light, no thicker than a pencil, descended from the heavens. It struck the bounty hunter leader. There was no explosion and no heat. The man simply ceased to exist. One moment he was there, an armored threat. The next, there was only a swirling vortex of ionized particles where his atoms used to be. The second hunter froze, looking at the empty space where his captain had stood. A second beam struck him. Gone. The third, the one Jalen had wounded, screamed and scrambled backward, trying to crawl away. The third beam took him before he made it 2 meters. Jalen lowered his rifle, his heart hammering against his ribs like a trapped bird. He looked up at the Dreadnought. The runes were glowing brighter now, shifting from violet to a blinding white. The sand around Jalen began to rise, gravity reversed. He felt his stomach lurch into his throat. "Oh, hell," he muttered. The world dissolved into white light. The sensation of teleportation was not like the instantaneous shift of Imperial transporters. It felt like being unspooled, thread by thread, and then woven back together in a different pattern. It was cold, intimate, and terrifying. When the light faded, Jalen was on his knees gasping for air. He was not on the moon anymore. The air smelled of ozone, petrichor, and something spicy, like cinnamon and burning electrics. He stood up slowly, his boots clicking on a floor that seemed to be made of black glass, yet rippled like water under his weight. He was in a corridor that defied architectural logic. The walls curved organically, pulsing with soft, bioluminescent veins of light. There were no sharp angles, no rivets, no welding seams. The ship felt less like a machine and more like the inside of a living beast. 2 guards stood before him. They were Kurai, tall and lithe, encased in armor that looked like chitin. They held glaives that hummed with energy, but they did not point them at him. They simply stood aside, gesturing down the hall. Jalen walked. He felt the vibration of the ship's drive core beneath his feet, a power source that dwarfed anything humanity had ever built. He passed viewports that showed the curvature of the moon below, looking like a discarded marble. The corridor opened into a vast chamber. It was a bridge, but it looked more like a cathedral. In the center, surrounded by floating displays of holographic data, sat the throne he had seen in the broadcast. And there she was. Virella Kai stood as he entered. In person, she was overwhelming. She stood nearly 7 feet tall, her stature enhanced by the heels of her armored boots. She wore a gown of shifting nano fabric that flowed like liquid metal, overlaid with ceremonial plating on her shoulders and chest. The neural tendrils that formed her crown twitched and coiled, reacting to her emotions. Jalen stopped 10 paces from her. He felt incredibly small in his scuffed, dust-covered scavenger suit. He reached up and unlatched his helmet, pulling it off. The air of the ship was cool on his sweaty face. He looked at her, really looked at her. The terrified girl from the garden was gone. In her place was a queen who could shatter worlds. But the eyes were the same. The bridge crew, dozens of Kurai technicians working silently at their stations, stopped and watched. The silence stretched, heavy and thick. Virella stepped down from the dais. She moved with a predatory grace, closing the distance between them. She stopped inches from him. He could smell the scent of her, strange, electric, and intoxicating. She looked down at him, her expression unreadable. She raised a hand, her long fingers tipped with sharp, black nails. Jalen flinched, a reflex born of 3 years of war and 20 years of survival. Virella paused. A small, sharp smile touched her lips. It wasn't a cruel smile, but it was dangerous. She reached out and touched his face, tracing the line of a scar that ran down his jaw. Her skin was still cool. The contact sent a jolt through him that was not entirely physical. "Jalen Reeve," she said softly, her voice echoing in the silent bridge. "You look tired." "I have had a long few years," Jalen rasped, his voice rough. "Your Highness." Her thumb brushed over his lower lip. "You thought I was dead. You thought my people were dust." "We all did," Jalen admitted. "The Imperium made sure of that." "The Imperium lies," she said, her eyes hardening. "And now, they will burn for it." She pulled her hand back, turning to look out the massive viewport at the stars. "They sent hunters for you. They knew I would come." "They didn't know," Jalen said. "They just wanted to tie up a loose end." Virella laughed, a low, throaty sound. She turned back to him, her neural tendrils glowing a fierce, bright azure. "You are not a loose end, Jalen. You are the only reason I did not open fire on this system the moment I arrived." She circled him, her gaze appraising him like a wolf inspecting a foundling. "I need a commander," she said. "My crew is loyal, but they do not know the enemy like you do. They do not know how humans think, how they lie, how they betray." "I am a human," Jalen said, standing straighter. "If you want to kill them, why do you want me?" Varela stopped in front of him again. She leaned in close, her face inches from his. He could see the intricate bioluminescent patterns swirling in her irises. "Because," she whispered, "hate is easy, destruction is simple. But I have a war to win, and for that, I need someone who understands honor in a galaxy that has none." She smirked, and for a second, the terrifying alien warlord vanished, and he saw the ghost of the girl he had saved. "Besides," she said, her voice dropping to a murmur that only he could hear, "did you think I would forget the only human who touched my skin without hurting me?" Jalen stared at her, the weight of her words settling on him. Outside the ship, the galaxy was holding its breath. Inside, the war had already begun, and he was standing at the center of it. "No," Jalen said quietly. "I didn't think you would." Varela turned back to her crew, her cloak swirling around her. "Take us to warp," she commanded. "Target the Arcani sector. We have a council to dismantle." The Dreadnought shuddered, power surging through the deck plates. Jalen looked at the woman who had just saved his life and effectively kidnapped him. He looked at the stars streaking into lines of light. He took a deep breath of the alien air. "At your command," he whispered. The Kurai Dreadnought did not move through space so much as it folded the universe around itself. To Jalen Reeve, standing on the observation deck of the vessel known as the Ethel Guard, the stars outside did not look like streaks of light. They looked like bruises on the skin of reality, shifting from violet to deep, sickly grays as the massive ship tore a hole through the fabric of the null space corridor. He had been aboard for 6 hours. In that time, he had seen things that defied every law of physics he had learned at the academy. He had seen corridors that reconfigured themselves based on the crew's destination. He had eaten nutrient paste that tasted exactly like fresh pears from a world that had been glassed a century ago. And he had watched Varela Kai pace the length of the strategic sanctum like a caged panther waiting for the keeper to turn his back. "You are quiet," she said. She did not turn around. She was staring at a holographic star map that floated in the center of the room, a complex web of light displaying the inner systems of the Terran Imperium. "I am processing," Jalen replied, leaning against a bulkhead that felt warm and organic against his back. "You have a ship the size of a moon. You have technology that makes our best cruisers look like steam engines. And you just told me you plan to fly it straight down the throat of the central sector." Varela turned then. The bioluminescent patterns on her skin were dim, pulsing a slow, rhythmic indigo. "Is that fear I hear, Commander, or tactical appraisal?" "It is common sense," Jalen said. "The Imperium is rotting from the inside, yes. But it is a rot backed by a fleet of 10,000 warships. If you go to the core, you die." Varela walked through the hologram, the light shattering around her waist and reforming in her wake. She stopped in front of him. "They killed my mother," she stated. The words were flat, devoid of the screaming rage he expected, which made them terrifying. "They killed my father, my brothers, my sisters. They burned the nurseries on Kura Prime. They took me, a child, and put me in a cage to ensure the obedience of a dead race." She raised a hand, and the star map shifted, It zoomed in on a massive station orbiting a gas giant, the Council Spire. I do not just want war. Jalen, I want an end. I will expose the Council. I will shatter their fleets, and I will reclaim the sovereignty they stole. Jalen rubbed the back of his neck, the neural interface port on the back of his skull, a remnant of his piloting days. Buzzed faintly in the presence of the ship's heavy ambient energy. I get it. I do. But I am human. You are asking me to help you burn my own species. I am asking you to help me burn cancer, she corrected. Or do you think the men who sent bounty hunters to execute you in the dirt of a dead moon are worth saving? Jalen looked away. That was the crux of it. He had been loyal to the uniform, not the politicians. But the uniform had betrayed him too. I am dead to them anyway, he muttered. Exactly, Varela said, stepping closer. The scent of ozone and cinnamon filled his senses again. The broadcast went out. Imperial Command has already scrubbed your file. To them. Jalen Reeve died in the bombardment of the moon. You are a ghost, and ghosts are the only ones who are truly free. Before Jalen could respond, the ambient hum of the room changed pitch. It went from a low thrum to a high, piercing whine. The lighting shifted from soft blue to an alert amber. A Kurai officer, his face hidden behind a sleek, faceless helm, materialized in the doorway. He spoke in a series of clicks and harmonic tones, the native tongue of the Kurai. Varela's eyes narrowed. She looked at Jalen. It begins. What begins? The first strike, she said, turning toward the door. Your people are faster than I anticipated. We have dropped out of null space to recharge the singularity drive, and they have found us. Jalen followed her, his long legs struggling to match her stride. Who found us? A fleet? No, Varela said, the doors to the corridor sliding open before she even reached them. Black Ops, infiltrator drones, they are trying to board us. The hangar bay of the Ethel Guard was a cavernous space that smelled of energized plasma and ancient metal. Rows of sleek, needle-like fighters hung suspended in magnetic fields, looking more like sculptures than weapons of war. Jalen stood on the flight deck, watching Kurai pilots scramble. They moved with a fluid, hive-like efficiency, communicating without words. Commander, Varela's voice cut through the din. She stood by a fighter that looked slightly different from the others, rougher, with modifications that marred its perfect symmetry. You were the best pilot in the academy, the only one who could fly the simulation of the Kessel Run without vomiting. That was 20 years ago, Jalen said, eyeing the alien craft. And I have never flown one of these. The interface alone will fry my brain. It is adapted, she said. I had the engineers rig a manual override and a dampened neural link. It will not be comfortable, but it will fly. Jalen stared at her. You want me to fly? Against my own people? I want you to defend this ship, Varela said, her voice hard. These are not conscripts out there. They are automated kill drones and stealth squads programmed to vent this ship's atmosphere and slaughter everyone aboard, including me. She tossed him a helmet. It was sleek, black, and devoid of any insignia. This is a test. Jalen, she said, her voice softening just a fraction. I need to know if you are with me, or if you are just a passenger. Jalen caught the helmet. He looked at the reflection in the visor, a tired, gray-bearded man with nothing left to lose. He looked at Varela, standing tall amidst the chaos of combat prep, a queen fighting for her right to exist. If I crash this thing, Jalen said, pulling the helmet on, I am blaming you. He climbed into the cockpit. The interior was tight, designed for the slender frame of a Kurai. The controls were a mix of haptic light panels and the crude, physical stick and throttle setup Varela had hastily installed. As the canopy sealed, the neural link engaged. It felt like an ice pick being driven into the base of his skull. Jalen gritted his teeth, groaning as his vision whitened. Then, the pain faded into a dull throb, replaced by a sudden, expanding awareness. He could feel the ship's engines as if they were his own legs. He could feel the sensors as if they were his skin. Wing 3. Launching. The flight controller's voice echoed in his mind, translated by the ship's computer, the magnetic clamps released. Jalen slammed the throttle forward. The Kurai fighter, a void needle, did not accelerate. It simply ceased to be stationary. The G-force was dampened by inertial compensators, but Jalen still felt his stomach drop as he shot out of the hangar bay and into the void. Space was filled with silent explosions. The Imperial attack force was small but vicious. 3 stealth corvettes had deployed hundreds of swarmer drones, unmanned, spider-like craft designed to latch onto a capital ship's hull and burrow inside like ticks. They are too small to target with the main batteries, a Kurai pilot signaled, his thought voice panicked. They are overwhelming the point defense grid. Jalen watched the tactical display. The Kurai pilots were flying in perfect geometric formations, executing elegant, sweeping arcs to pick off the drones. It was beautiful. It was also useless. The drones were erratic, programmed with chaos algorithms to predict and evade logical patterns. "Break formation," Jalen shouted over the comms. "You are flying too clean, they can predict you." "Who is this?" a pilot demanded. "Who gave the human a channel?" "Do as he says," Varela's voice cut in from the bridge, absolute and terrifying. Jalen banked hard, ignoring the safeties that screamed he was pulling too many Gs for a biological pilot. He drove his fighter straight into the thickest cloud of drones. "They are machines," Jalen muttered, his hands dancing over the controls. "They react to threats. So give them a threat they cannot calculate." He cut his engines. In the vacuum, his fighter became a ballistic rock, tumbling end over end through the swarm. The drones, tracking heat signatures and engine trails, lost him for a microsecond. Jalen spun the ship on its axis, facing backward, and slammed the afterburners. He flew in reverse, his forward cannons blazing. The plasma bolts tore through the swarm. It was messy. It was brutal. It was entirely human. "He is flying backward," a Kurai pilot noted, sounding horrified and impressed. "It is called the Tharsis Drift." Jalen grunted, sweat stinging his eyes. "Now stop dancing and start brawling. Get in close. Overload their proximity sensors." The Kurai hesitated, then broke their perfect geometry. They dove into the chaos, mimicking Jalen's erratic movements. The battle turned into a frenzied knife fight in the dark. Jalen spun his ship again, locking onto a cluster of drones heading for the Dreadnought's engine exhaust. He diverted all power to weapons, his shields dropping to 0. "Eating this," he growled, squeezing the trigger. A fan of violet energy erupted from his cannons, vaporizing the cluster. But one drone, half slagged and burning, spiraled past him and latched onto his wing. The cockpit alarm screamed. The drone began to drill. "I have a parasite," Jalen yelled. "Hold position," a calm voice said. A Kurai fighter swooped in from above, passing within meters of Jalen's canopy. With surgical precision, the pilot clipped the drone off Jalen's wing with the edge of their shields, sending it spinning into the void. "Human tactics are messy," the pilot said, "but effective." Jalen let out a breath he didn't know he was holding. "Thanks." "Clear the area," Varela ordered. "The main batteries are charged." Jalen pushed his throttle, rejoining the formation as they peeled away. Behind them, The Ethelguard's secondary guns opened up, a wall of flak that incinerated the remaining stealth corvettes. The battle was over in 12 minutes. The debriefing room was silent. Jalen sat on a bench, his flight suit unzipped to his waist, wiping grease and sweat from his face with a towel. His hands were shaking slightly. The adrenaline crash was hitting him hard. Varela entered. The air in the room changed instantly, charged with her presence. She dismissed the other pilots with a wave of her hand. They bowed low to her, then glanced at Jalen. One of them, the pilot who had saved him, gave him a curt nod before leaving. "You fought well," Varela said, and she was standing over him, looking immaculate, untouched by the violence that had just occurred. "I fought like a desperate man," Jalen corrected. "Your pilots are better, and they just need to learn that war isn't a math equation." "Perhaps," she said. "Or perhaps they just lack the human capacity for insanity." She smiled then, a genuine expression that reached her eyes. "Come. You are filthy, and you smell of fear and hydraulic fluid." She led him not to his quarters, but deeper into the ship, to the personal sanctum of the commander. The room was vast, dominated by a central pool filled with a translucent, glowing, viscous liquid. Steam rose from the surface, smelling of mineral salts and night-blooming flowers. The walls were transparent aluminum, looking out into the star field. "This is a regeneration chamber," Varela explained. "The fluid repairs microfractures and flushes toxins from the blood. After a neural link, it is necessary." She walked to the edge of the pool. Without pausing, she reached back and unclasped the ceremonial plating at her shoulders. The heavy armor fell to the floor with a clang. Next came the gown, sliding off her body like water. Jalen turned around sharply, facing the wall. His heart hammered against his ribs. "Varela, Turn around, Jalen," she said. Her voice was not seductive. It was commanding, yet strangely vulnerable. "I am not going to disrespect you," he said, staring at the rivets on the bulkhead. "Disrespect?" She laughed softly, a sound like chimes in the wind. "You once told me, when I was 16 and crying because the other cadets called me a monster, that I should never be ashamed of my form. You told me my biology was not a curse. Did you lie?" Jalen swallowed hard. He remembered that day. She had been trying to file down the nubs of her neural tendrils with a rock, trying to look human. He had stopped her, held her hands, and told her she was beautiful. "I didn't lie," he rasped. "Then look." Jalen turned. She was standing waist-deep in the glowing fluid. She was breathtaking. Her skin was a tapestry of bioluminescent markings, swirling patterns of light that moved in time with her heartbeat. She was alien, yes. Her limbs were slightly too long, her waist too narrow, her spine ridged with delicate, glowing nodes, but she was undeniably terrifyingly beautiful. But it wasn't the nudity that struck him. It was the scars. Thin silver lines crisscrossed her torso and arms, marks of surgery, marks of experimentation. The Imperium had not just held her hostage, they had studied her. They had carved her open to see what made a Kurai tick. Jalen felt a surge of rage so pure it nearly choked him. "They did that to you?" Varela sank lower into the fluid, the glowing water lapping at her collarbone. Her neural tendrils drifted on the surface, spreading out like a halo. "They wanted to know how we manipulate gravity," she said softly. "They wanted to know if our DNA could be spliced. They took everything from me, Jalen, my dignity, my family, my skin." She looked at him, and the regal mask slipped completely. For the first time, he saw the ocean of grief she was swimming in. "Why did you save me?" she asked. "Back then, why were you kind?" Jalen walked to the edge of the pool. He knelt down, resting his arm on his knee. He didn't touch her, but the distance between them felt electric. "Because you were a child," he said, "and because, even then, I think I knew the Imperium was wrong. I just didn't have the courage to say it until it was too late." "It is not too late," she whispered. The tension in the room shifted. It wasn't just gratitude anymore. It was something heavier, thicker. The way the light from the pool reflected in her eyes, the way she looked at his mouth. Jalen felt a magnetic pull, a desire to reach out and touch the glowing skin, to trace the scars and promise her that no one would ever hurt her again. He leaned in slightly. She did not pull back. Her eyes fluttered shut, her lips parting. "Commander!" The voice of the ship's tactical officer boomed over the intercom, shattering the moment like glass. Jalen jerked back, standing up so fast he nearly stumbled. Varella's eyes snapped open, the vulnerability vanishing instantly, replaced by the cold steel of the warlord. "Report," she commanded, her voice projecting clearly despite the lack of a comms unit. The ship listened to her everywhere. "We have intercepted a hyperwave transmission," the officer said. "High-level encryption. Source, Imperial High Council. Destination, Sector 4 Armory." Varela stood up, the fluid sluicing off her skin. She walked out of the pool, unashamed, and grabbed a robe from a floating drone. "Get dressed, Jalen," she said, tying the sash tight. "The war does not wait for us to heal." The bridge was a flurry of activity. Holographic displays filled the air, scrolling through streams of decoded data. "We cracked the cipher," the communications officer said as Varela and Jalen entered. "It is an Alpha 1 priority order." Varela waved her hand, and the message played audio. "Threat level extinction. The Karai vessel must be neutralized before it reaches the core worlds. Conventional fleets are ineffective. Authorization granted for Protocol 0. Activate the null pulse. Target coordinates attached." The silence on the bridge was absolute. Even the hum of the engines seemed to quiet down. "Null pulse," Varela said, the words tasting of poison. She turned to Jalen. "Tell me I am hearing this wrong. Tell me your people did not keep that technology." Jalen stared at the waveform on the screen. He felt sick. "The null pulse," he said, his voice hollow. "An ancient weapon. It creates a localized field that negates all electron flow. It doesn't just shut down ships. It stops hearts. It stops synapses firing. It kills everything, biological and digital, in a 3 light-year radius." "It was banned," Varela said, her voice trembling with suppressed fury. "By the Treaty of Centauri. By the very laws your Imperium claims to uphold." "Laws are for peace," Jalen said bitterly. "The Imperium is fighting for survival now. They don't care about treaties." Varela turned on him, her eyes blazing. "And you? Do you defend this? Is this the humanity you want me to spare?" "No," Jalen said quickly. "I don't defend it. It's a monstrosity. They are going to use it on us," she said. "They will wipe out this ship and 3 inhabited systems nearby just to stop me." She grabbed Jalen by the front of his flight suit, pulling him down to her level. "Where is it?" "The message has coordinates for the activation key. But the weapon itself, where would they hide something that big?" Jalen looked into her eyes. He saw the fear there, not for herself, but for the systems that would be caught in the crossfire. He had a choice. He could protect the secrets of the military he had served for half his life, or he could save millions of innocents and the woman standing in front of him. It wasn't really a choice. "The message mentioned Sector 4, Jalen said, his voice steady. "There is a freight station there, deep orbit around a brown dwarf star. It is officially a Tabana gas refinery. Station K9. Varela loosened her grip. But, Jalen continued, it's not a refinery. It's a black site storage facility. If the null pulse exists, it's there. And if they are activating it, we have less than 48 hours before they can mount it on a delivery missile. Varela stepped back. She looked at the crew. Set a course for Sector 4, she commanded. Maximum warp. She looked back at Jalen. The anger was gone, replaced by a grim resolve. You just betrayed your entire civilization. Jalen Reeve, she said softly. No, Jalen said, watching the stars streak into lines of light once more. I just chose the right side of history. Then let us hope, Varela said, turning to the viewport. That history is kind to traitors. The Ethelguard roared, vanishing into the fold, racing toward a weapon that could end them all. The transition from null space to real space usually felt like a sudden drop in atmospheric pressure, a popping of the ears that signaled a return to the laws of physics. But when the Ethelguard emerged this time, the sensation was heavier, like sinking into deep water. Jalen Reeve stood on the bridge, his hands gripping the railing of the command walkway. Outside the massive viewports, there were no stars. There was only a graveyard. They had arrived in the debris field of the Othris Nebula. It was a place forbidden by Imperial navigation charts, marked only as a navigational hazard. Now Jalen saw why. It was not a natural hazard. It was a massacre frozen in time. Floating in the amber gas of the nebula were the skeletal remains of ships. Thousands of them. Some were recognizable as ancient Imperial frigates, their hulls rusted and pitted. But the others, the massive curved spines of white metal, the shattered crystalline drive rings, those were Kurai. The boneyards, Verelikai said. She stood beside him, not looking at the view screen but staring at the floor, as if she could feel the dead through the deck plating. This is where my grandfather's fleet made its last stand. The Imperium claimed it was a diplomatic summit gone wrong. In reality, it was an ambush. They jammed our sensors and opened fire with nuclear torpedoes. Jalen looked at the devastation. He had studied the Battle of Othris in history class. The text had called it a pacification of hostile insurgents. Looking at the sheer volume of wreckage, he realized it had been an extermination. Why are we here? Jalen asked quietly. If we are on a clock to stop the null pulse, this seems like a detour. We need a signature, Varela replied. She walked toward the weapons station where a tactical officer was scanning the debris. The Imperial freight station we are targeting, Station K9, is equipped with biometric scanners. It detects species, rank, and genetic history. If we walk in as a Kurai and a rogue human, the alarms will trigger before we dock. She tapped a console, and a holographic schematic of a Kurai warship appeared. We need to salvage a specific component, a gene sequencer from a Royal Guard vessel. It contains the raw data I need to synthesize a disguise. Jalen frowned. A disguise? You mean a hologram? No, Varela said, turning to him. Her face was grim. I mean skin, living, breathing skin. She gestured for him to follow her. They left the bridge and descended into the bowels of the ship, down to the genetic laboratories. The air here was sterile, smelling of antiseptic and ozone. Varela stopped in front of a stasis tube containing a swirling, silver liquid. You asked me once why I was at the academy, she said. Why was a princess kept as a hostage? To ensure the treaty, Jalen said. Standard political leverage. That was the lie, Varela said. She placed her hand on the glass. I was not just a hostage, Jalen. I was a prototype. Jalen felt a chill that had nothing to do with the room's temperature. Prototype for what? The Imperium was fascinated by Kurai physiology, our ability to interface with technology, our resilience, our longevity. They did not just want to rule us. They wanted to become us. Or rather, they wanted to harvest the best parts of us and graft them onto soldiers. She turned to face him, her expression a mixture of fury and deep, ancient shame. They used my DNA, they spliced it, they tried to create hybrids, super soldiers with Kurai reflexes and human aggression. Most of the subjects died in agony. I was in the control group, the source. I spent my childhood with needles in my spine. Jalen, when you saw me that day in the garden, I wasn't just suffocating from the atmosphere. I was recovering from a bone marrow extraction. Jalen stared at her, horror dawning on him. The scars he had seen in the bath chamber suddenly made sickening sense. They weren't just from torture, they were from harvest. That is why I know where the null pulse is, she continued softly. Because the man who designed it was the same man who designed the genetic program, Director Kalen. He viewed my people as spare parts, and he viewed that weapon as the ultimate pesticide. She looked back at the silver liquid. I am going to use their own research against them. We will retrieve the sequencer from the wreckage outside. I will use it to weave a biosuit, a second skin. It will mask your heat signature, your heartbeat, and your DNA to the scanners. You will read as a high-ranking Imperial logistics officer, and I will read as your cargo. The infiltration of Station K9 began 6 hours later. The station was a monstrosity of industrial efficiency, a tangled knot of docking pylons, cargo containers, and venting plasma conduits orbiting a brown dwarf star. It was ugly, practical, and teeming with Imperial activity. They docked a small, stolen transport shuttle in Bay 42. The airlock hissed open, revealing a grimy corridor that smelled of recycled oil and unwashed bodies, the distinct scent of the Imperial working class. Jalen Reeve stepped out, but he was not Jalen Reeve. He wore the gray and black uniform of a senior logistics commander, but it was not just the clothes. His face was sharper, his jawline altered by a layer of synthetic flesh. His eyes, usually a warm hazel, were now contact lens to a severe gray, but the biggest change was underneath. The biosuit Varela had synthesized clung to his entire body like a wetsuit made of living tissue. It was uncomfortable, pulsing faintly against his own skin, regulating his temperature and masking his vitals. Varela walked behind him. She wore a heavy containment cloak, hood up, her hands bound in magnetic cuffs. To any observer, she was a prisoner transfer, a high-value asset being moved to the secure wing. Shoulders back, she whispered over the comms bead in his ear. You are walking like a soldier. Walk like a bureaucrat, arrogant, but lazy. Jalen adjusted his posture, loosening his stride. I hate this, he muttered, barely moving his lips. Focus, she commanded. We have to get to the sub-level archives. The coordinates for the pulse will be on the physical servers. It is too dangerous to hack them remotely. They passed a checkpoint. 2 stormtroopers stood guard, their white armor scuffed and dirty. They held E-11 blaster rifles loosely. Identification, the lead trooper grunted, not even looking up from his datapad. Jalen held out his wrist. The biosuit projected a false ID code. The scanner beeped green. Commander Vance, the trooper read. Transferring a... What is this? Class 4 biological asset? Class 5, Jalen corrected, injecting a tone of bored irritation into his voice. And it is highly volatile. If you want to inspect it, be my guest. But when it melts the skin off your face, do not expect me to fill out the paperwork. The trooper looked at the hooded figure of Varela. A low, menacing growl emanated from beneath the cloak, a sound she synthesized perfectly. The trooper stepped back. "Clear! Move along, sir!" They moved deeper into the station. The noise of the docks faded, replaced by the hum of ventilation fans and the distant clanking of machinery. They took a service lift down to the sub-levels. When the doors opened, the corridor was empty and dimly lit. Shadows stretched long and jagged across the floor gratings. "We are close," Varela whispered. "The server room is at the end of this hall." Jalen hurried forward, but Varela suddenly grabbed his arm, pulling him into a dark alcove behind a stack of crates. "Patrol!" she hissed. Seconds later, a squad of heavy troopers marched past, their heavy boots clanging rhythmically on the deck. They were talking about shift rotations and the terrible quality of the chow hall food. Jalen and Varela were pressed together in the darkness. The space was incredibly tight. Jalen's back was against the cold metal of a crate, and Varela was pressed against his chest. Because of the biosuit, Jalen's sensory input was heightened. He could feel the heat radiating from her body through the thin layers of their disguises. He could feel the rapid thrum of her dual hearts beating against his ribcage. The patrol passed, but neither of them moved. The silence in the alcove was heavy, charged with adrenaline and something else, something magnetic. Varela looked up at him. Her hood had fallen back slightly, revealing her blue chin and the curve of her lips. In the low light, her eyes were vast pools of indigo, reflecting the fear and the intensity of the moment. "Your heart is racing," she whispered. "The biosuit is trying to compensate, but I can feel it. You are terrified." "I am alert," Jalen whispered back, his voice straining. "There is a difference." "Is there?" She shifted, her leg brushing against his. The friction sent a spark through the neural mesh of his suit, a physical sensation that felt like a static shock. She reached up, her hand finding the back of his neck. Her fingers were cool, even through the synthetic skin. "This skin," she murmured, tracing the line of his false jaw. "It was grown from my own genetic markers. Technically, Jalen, you are wearing a part of me." The implication hung in the air, heavy and intimate. "Varela," he warned, his breath hitching. "We are in the middle of an enemy base." "I know," she said. She didn't pull away. She leaned in closer. "But I feel your energy field, that it is syncing with mine. It happens when Kurai bond. It is biological, inevitable." She looked at his lips. "This isn't a strategy, human. This is needed." Jalen looked at her. He saw the woman who had saved him from the moon. He saw the queen who commanded a dreadnought. And he saw the terrified girl in the garden. All of them were looking at him with a hunger that had nothing to do with war. Reason abandoned him. He grabbed her waist, pulling her flush against him. He kissed her. It was not a gentle kiss. It was urgent, desperate, tasting of adrenaline and the cinnamon spice of her skin. It was the release of 20 years of regret and 3 days of terror. Varela froze for a split second, surprised by the sudden aggression. Then she melted into it, her hands tangled in his hair, her neural tendrils flaring with soft blue light that illuminated the shadows of the alcove. She made a sound low in her throat, a vibration that Jalen felt in his bones, but for a moment, the station, the war, the null pulse, it all ceased to exist. There was only the heat of her, the taste of her, the overwhelming reality of being alive in a universe that wanted them dead. Then, just as Jalen's hand moved to the small of her back, pressing her closer, she stiffened. She broke the kiss, pushing him back with a strength that was surprising for her slender frame. They stood there, chests heaving, staring at each other in the gloom. Jalen's lips were tingling. "Virella!" he started, reaching for her again. "Stop!" she commanded. Her voice was shaky but firm. She placed a hand on his chest, right over his heart. "Not now," she whispered. Her eyes searched his, looking for something deeper than lust. "I will not be a comfort in the dark, Jalen. It will not be a mistake you make because you think you are going to die." She smoothed the front of his uniform, her fingers lingering for a second. "Not until you have chosen me over your past," she said. "Not until you are sure you are not just fighting against them, but for me." Jalen stared at her, the rejection stinging but the truth of her words cutting deeper. She was right. He was still wearing the uniform of the Imperium, even if it was a disguise. He was still Jalen Reeve, ex-commander. He hadn't fully let go. "I am here, aren't I?" he whispered. "Being here is geography," she said, pulling her hood back up. "Loyalty is a destination you have not reached yet." She turned and checked the corridor. "The patrol is gone. Let us move." The server room was a frozen locker of data towers. The temperature was kept near absolute zero to cool the massive quantum processors. Jalen stood guard at the door while Virella interfaced with the terminal. She didn't type. She extended a neural filament from her wrist, plugging it directly into the data port. Her eyes rolled back, glowing white as she navigated the digital ocean of the Imperial network. "I have found it," she said, her voice distant, mechanical. "The null pulse, it is not on a planet. It is mobile." "Mobile?" Jalen asked, checking his weapon. "They have loaded it onto a stealth carrier, the Obsidian. It is holding orbit on the dark side of the gas giant below us. They are waiting for the command to deploy." "Download the coordinates," Jalen said. "We can intercept it." "Downloading now. I am also scrubbing the logs so they won't know we were—" The door behind Jalen hissed open. He spun around, raising his blaster, but he was too slow. A towering figure stood there, a cyborg shock trooper, heavy plating grafted directly onto flesh, a rotary cannon integrated into his arm. Behind him were 6 regular stormtroopers. "Intruders!" the cyborg boomed, his voice a grinding of gears. "Sector 7, open fire! Virella, get down!" Jalen screamed. He dove to the right as the rotary cannon spun up. A hail of red plasma bolts tore through the room, shredding the server towers. Sparks and coolant gas exploded into the air, creating a blinding fog. Jalen fired back blindly, his bolts sparking harmlessly off the cyborg's heavy armor. "I have the data," Virella yelled, pulling her interface free. "We are cut off," Jalen shouted. He was pinned behind a slagged console. The troopers were advancing, their fire suppressing him completely. He saw a ventilation duct on the far wall. "The vent! Virella, go! I will cover you!" "No!" she screamed. Jalen popped up to fire, aiming for the cyborg's visual sensors. He hit one, shattering the glass, but the cyborg didn't even flinch. The rotary cannon swung toward Jalen. There was no time to move. Jalen braced himself for the impact, but the impact never came. A blur of gray and blue moved across his vision. Virella had crossed the room with supernatural speed. She threw herself in front of him, expanding her own personal energy shield. The barrage of plasma slammed into her. The shield flared brilliant violet, holding for a second, then shattered with the sound of breaking glass. 2 bolts struck her, one in the shoulder, one in the side. She gasped, the sound wet and terrible, and collapsed backward into Jalen's arms. "No!" Jalen roared. Fury, cold and absolute, flooded his veins. He didn't think so. He grabbed a thermal detonator from his belt, one he had scavenged from the supplies, primed it, and hurled it directly at the cyborg's feet. "Eat this!" He grabbed Virella and dragged her behind the thickest server bank. The explosion was deafening. The shockwave knocked the breath out of him. The cyborg and the front line of troopers were vaporized in a ball of fire. Jalen didn't wait for the smoke to clear. He scooped Varela up. She was light, terrifyingly light. Her blue blood was already soaking through the containment cloak. He tapped his comms bead. "Transport, now, lock onto my beacon, emergency extraction." "Signal lock acquired," the Ethelguard's AI responded. "Shields are up on the station. We cannot beam through." "Drop the shields," Jalen yelled, running toward the service lift, firing his pistol one-handed at the surviving troopers pursuing them. "Or I will blow this whole damn station manually." "Commander," Varela whispered, her head lolling against his chest. Her eyes were dim. "The data." "Save the data." "Shut up," Jalen gritted out. "I am saving you." He kicked the lift doors open. He threw a magnetic jammer onto the control panel, frying the station's local grid. The lights died. The shields flickered. "Shields down," the AI confirmed. "Beam us up." The familiar sensation of being unspooled took him. The darkness of the station vanished, replaced by the blinding white light of the Ethelguard's medical bay. "Stabilize her! Get the trauma team!" "Yeah," Jalen was shouting before he even fully materialized. Medics, both Kurai and automated drones, swarmed them. They pulled Varela from his arms, laying her onto a floating gurney. The sight of her wound made Jalen's stomach turn. The plasma had cauterized the entry points, but the tissue damage was deep. Her bioluminescence was flickering erratically, like a dying light bulb. "You must leave, Commander," a medical officer said, pushing Jalen back. "The procedure requires a sterile field." "No," Jalen snarled. He ripped off the remnants of his logistics uniform, tearing the synthetic skin from his face. It came away in bloody strips. But he didn't feel the pain. "I am not leaving her." The officer hesitated, looking at the wild look in the human's eyes, then nodded. "Stay out of the way." They moved her into a stasis field. Lasers began to knit tissue back together. Nanobots were injected into her bloodstream to repair the organ damage. Jalen stood by the wall, watching. He was shaking, not from fear of death, but from the realization of what had just happened. She had taken a bullet for him, a princess, a warlord, the last hope of her people, had thrown herself in front of a washed-up human scavenger. Hours passed. The activity slowed, the monitors stabilized to a steady rhythmic beep. Jalen walked to the side of the biobed. Varela was conscious, but barely. Her eyes were glassy, fever bright. "You are an idiot," Jalen whispered, his voice cracking. He took her hand. It was burning hot. "Strategic. Error," she murmured, a faint smile touching her lips. "My shield. Should have held." "You shouldn't have been in front of me," Jalen said. He squeezed her hand. "I am expendable. Varela. You are the revolution." Suddenly, her grip tightened. It was shocking in its strength. She pulled him down, her other hand grabbing the collar of his flight suit. "Do not say that," she hissed. The fever was talking now, stripping away her filters. "You are not expendable, not to me." She stared up at him, her indigo eyes swirling with a chaotic mix of pain and adoration. "You belong here," she said, her voice fierce, possessing, "beside me, in me." The raw honesty of the words hit Jalen like a physical blow. It was a claim, a demand. "Varela, say it," she demanded, pulling him closer until their foreheads touched. "Say you will stay." "I—" Whoop, whoop, whoop. The red alert klaxon screamed through the ship, shattering the intimacy of the moment. The lights in the medbay turned a pulsing crimson. "Report!" Jalen shouted, instinctively turning toward the wall comms unit. "Commander!" The bridge officer's voice was panicked. Massive warp signature detected, done point-blank range when it is... By the gods, it is huge. What is it? It is an Imperial Dreadnought, sir. The Colossus. It has found us. The ship shuddered violently as the first turbo-laser volley slammed into the shields. Virella tried to sit up, groaning in pain. Jalen pushed her back down gently but firmly. "Stay," he ordered. "Heal." He turned toward the door, his face hardening into a mask of cold determination. He was done running. He was done hiding in scrap heaps. "I am going to the bridge," Jalen said, looking back at her one last time. "I am going to buy you your future." He ran out of the medbay as the Ethel Guard shook again, the roar of the enemy guns vibrating through the hull. The infiltration was over. The war had truly begun. The Imperial Dreadnought Colossus was not designed with aesthetics in mind. It was a flying city of gunmetal gray, a slab of industrial violence 5 miles long, bristling with enough turbo lasers to boil the oceans off a mid-sized planet. It sat in the void like a tombstone, blocking out the nebula, its forward batteries glowing with the sickly green light of charging kyber-focusing arrays. On the bridge of the Ethel Guard, the air tasted of ozone and copper. The Kurai ship was screaming. "Shields at 40%, the tactical officer shouted, his voice distorted by the harmonics of the hull vibrating under impact. "They are using cyclic modulation. They are punching right through the primary deflection grid." Jalen Reeves stood at the tactical rail, his knuckles white as he gripped the console. The view screen was a chaotic wash of explosions. The Ethel Guard was faster, more advanced, but she was smaller, and she was caught in a gravity well generated by the enemy ship's interdiction field. They were trapped in a boxing match with a giant, and they were already bleeding. "Virella!" Jalen yelled, turning toward the command throne. "We need to jump. We can't trade broadsides with that thing." Virella Kai slumped in the command interface chair. The medical stasis had closed her wounds, but she was pale, her blue skin ashy and dull. The neural tendrils at the back of her head were plugged directly into the ship's core, but the connection was draining her. Every hit the ship took, she felt. She flinched as a torpedo detonated against the hull, a spasm of pain crossing her face. "We cannot jump," she gasped, her eyes squeezed shut. "The interdiction field, it anchors us to real space. We have to break their emitter. Then divert power to the singularity shields," Jalen ordered the crew, stepping into the command role naturally. "Absorb the fire." "I cannot," Virella whispered. Her voice was thin, terrifyingly weak. "The singularity requires total focus. My mind, it is too scattered. The pain." She slumped forward, the connection cables pulling taut. The lights on the bridge flickered and dimmed. The ship was dying because its heart was failing. Jalen looked at her, then at the encroaching monster on the screen. He made a choice. He vaulted over the railing and ran to the throne. "Make room," he growled. Virella opened her eyes, hazy with shock. "Jalen, you cannot. The interface, it will burn you out. You are human. You do not have the neural pathways." "I have a port," Jalen said, tapping the socket at the base of his skull, the standard-issue pilot interface he had used for 20 years. "And I am stubborn." He didn't wait for permission. He grabbed the secondary cable, a thick coil of living fiber meant for a Kurai first officer, and jammed it into his skull. The world did not fade to black. It exploded into white. It was not like flying a fighter. It was not like driving a car. It was like becoming a god who was currently on fire. Jalen screamed as his nervous system was flooded with the sensory data of a capital ship. He felt the hull plates as his own skin. He felt the fusion reactor as his own beating heart. He felt the cold vacuum of space against his face. And he felt her. Virella was a storm in his mind. He didn't just hear her thoughts, he drowned in them. Pain. Cold cages, a needle in the spine. The smell of burning nurseries. Mother screaming. The memories hit Jalen with the force of a physical blow. He saw a child, small and blue, huddled in a dark cell, scratching equations into the floor just to keep from going mad. He felt the crushing loneliness of 20 years spent as a specimen. Jalen. Her thought voice was a desperate cry in the hurricane. Pull back, it is too much. No, Jalen gritted out, his physical body shaking in the chair next to her. He reached out, mentally and physically, and grabbed her hand. Use me. I am the anchor. You are the weapon. Focus. Virella. He pushed his own mind into the mix. He gave her everything. The roar of atmospheric re-entry. The guilt of the order he disobeyed. The face of the men he couldn't save. The empty bottle on the table of a dead moon. Virella gasped as his pain washed over her. She saw herself through his eyes, not as a monster, but as something beautiful and broken that deserved to be saved. The connection stabilized. 2 minds, 1 circuit. The pain didn't vanish, but it became shared, manageable. The fear evaporated, replaced by a cold, crystalline clarity. Together, she whispered in his mind. Together, he echoed. On the outside, the Ethelgard changed. The flickering lights solidified into a blinding, angry azure. The ship moved with a sudden, terrifying fluidity. Atmosphere folding, Virella commanded, her voice resonating through the ship's speakers and Jalen's skull simultaneously. The Dreadnought did not fire. Instead, it projected a localized field of condensed gas, creating a pocket of pressurized atmosphere in the vacuum between the 2 ships. The Colossus fired its main turbo lasers. The beams hit the gas pocket and bloomed, refracting and scattering harmlessly into a dazzling light show. Now, Jalen thought, singularity? Virella squeezed his hand. The Ethelgard's forward prongs opened. A sphere of absolute darkness formed, a microscopic black hole held in a magnetic stasis field. Fire! The singularity shot forward, invisible against the black of space, detectable only by the way it bent the light of the stars around it. It struck the Colossus amidships, right on the interdiction generator. There was no explosion. There was only an implosion. The entire midsection of the Imperial Dreadnought crumpled inward, metal screeching as it was crushed into a point the size of a marble. The interdiction field collapsed instantly. Neural torpedoes, Virella ordered. Target the bridge. End them. Jalen felt the weapons load. These weren't explosive. They were EMP charges tuned to the biorhythms of the crew. They fired. 6 streaks of blue light slammed into the command tower of the Colossus. The Imperial ship went dark, dead in the water. Jump! Jalen gasped, feeling his brain beginning to fry at the edges. Get us out of here. The Ethelgard tore reality open and vanished. The disconnect was worse than the link. It felt like having a limb amputated. Jalen woke up on the floor of the bridge. He was bleeding from his nose and ears. His body felt light, hollowed out. Commander! A medic was over him. I'm fine, Jalen croaked, though he couldn't feel his legs. Virella? He looked up. She was still in the throne, slumped over, breathing in ragged gasps. But she was alive. She turned her head, her indigo eyes locking onto his. There was no wall between them anymore. He could still feel the ghost of her presence in the back of his mind, a hum of gratitude and exhaustion. They took him to the cryo chamber. It wasn't for freezing, but for thermal regulation. His body temperature had spiked to lethal levels during the link. Jalen lay in the glass coffin, the cold mist swirling around him, numbing the ache in his bones. The medbay was quiet, The lights dimmed to a soothing amber. He stared at the ceiling, replaying the battle, replaying the feeling of her mind inside his. It was intimate in a way that made sex feel like a handshake. It was terrifying. The door to the chamber hissed open. Virella stood there. She had shed her armor. She wore a simple robe of white silk that clung to her damp skin. She looked frail, her bioluminescence dim, but her eyes were burning with a feverish intensity. She didn't speak. She walked to the control panel and deactivated the thermal lock. The glass lid rose with a hiss. "You should be resting," Jalen whispered, shivering as the warmer air of the room hit his skin. "I cannot rest," she said. She climbed into the pod. It was a tight fit. She straddled him, her knees on either side of his hips. The cold mist swirled around them, reacting to the heat of her body. She placed her hands on his chest, her skin cool against his fever-hot flesh. "Virella." "You saw me," she said, her voice trembling. "In the link, you saw everything, the cages, the fear, the shame." "I saw a survivor," Jalen said, reaching up to touch her face. His hand was shaking. "I saw the strongest person I have ever known." "And I saw you," she countered. She leaned down, her forehead touching his. Her neural tendrils drifted forward, brushing against his temples, sending sparks of pleasure pain down his spine. "I saw your guilt. You think you are broken, Jalen Reeve. You think you are just a weapon to be discarded." "I am," he murmured. "No." She kissed him. It wasn't like the kiss in the station that had been desperate, a stolen moment in the dark. This was a collision. She didn't just kiss his mouth, she kissed his mind. As her lips crushed against his, the neural link flared back to life, uncontrolled, raw. Jalen gasped into her mouth as he felt her desire flood his system. It wasn't human desire when it was vast, oceanic, and overwhelming. It was a need to merge, to consume and be consumed. "Choose me," she commanded, pulling back slightly, her eyes glowing white. "The Imperium threw you away. The galaxy forgot you. But I see you. Now. Jalen. Choose me." "I choose you," he choked out. "I choose you." She moved against him, shedding the robe. The sensation of her skin, slick, bioluminescent, alien against his, was electric. When they joined, it wasn't just physical friction. It was a complete circuit. Jalen arched his back, a cry torn from his throat as the pleasure hit him on two levels simultaneously. He felt her sensation as if it were his own. He felt the exact moment she surrendered control, the way her dual hearts hammered a frantic rhythm against his chest. It was chaotic. It was messy. It was a desperate clawing for connection in the face of death. She wrapped her legs around him, anchoring him, her tendrils glowing so bright they lit up the cryo chamber like a supernova. "Mine," she broadcasted into his mind, a possessive, primal roar. "Yours," he answered, surrendering the last of his defenses. They moved together in the mist, a tangle of limbs and light, until the climax hit them like a shockwave, leaving them both gasping, tangled, and utterly shattered. The silence afterward was heavy, but it wasn't empty. It was full of a strange, vibrating peace. Virella lay with her head on his chest, her breathing slowly synchronizing with his. The neural link had faded to a background hum, a comfortable awareness of each other's presence. Jalen ran his hand down her spine, tracing the ridges of her vertebrae. "You almost killed us," he murmured, no heat in his voice. "I almost killed you," she corrected softly. "A Kurai mate bond. It is intense. Humans are not built for it." "I survived," Jalen said. "Barely." She shifted, propping herself up on her elbows to look at him. The fierce warlord was gone. In her place was a woman who looked unsure of her footing. "I told you I wanted revenge," she said quietly. That was the truth, but it is not the whole truth. She traced the line of his jaw, her finger lingering on his lips. "When I was in the cage, Jalen, I didn't dream of burning the Imperium. I dreamed of walking in a garden. I dreamed of silence. I dreamed of someone holding me without measuring my heart rate." She looked down, her expression vulnerable. "I want to be remembered," she confessed. "Not as the monster who destroyed the galaxy, but as the one who fixed it. I want a future. I want to build something that isn't made of guns and blood." She looked back at him, her eyes searching. "I want that with you. If you will have a monster." Jalen sat up, the movement stiff but determined. He wrapped his arms around her, pulling her close, burying his face in the crook of her neck. "You are not a monster, Virella," he whispered, "and you are not fighting this alone anymore. We build the future together, or we burn trying." She rested her head against his shoulder, and for the first time since he had met her, she seemed to truly relax. The moment of peace lasted exactly 40 minutes. A chime from the wall panel broke the silence. It was a priority alert, but not from the sensors. It was from internal security. Virella stiffened instantly. The vulnerability evaporated, replaced by the cold steel of the commander. She grabbed her robe and pulled it on, stepping out of the pod. "Report," she snapped at the panel. "My queen." The security chief's voice was grave. "We have detected an outgoing transmission, narrow-band, encrypted. It was sent during the battle, masked by the electronic warfare static." "To whom?" "To the Imperial Fleet Command. It contained our shield modulation frequencies and our current damage report. It is the reason the Colossus found us." Jalen climbed out of the pod, pulling on his trousers. His blood ran cold. "You have a leak." "Trace it," Virella commanded, her voice dropping to a dangerous register. "We did. It originated from auxiliary engineering. Terminal 4. Virella's face went blank. "Kael'thas," she turned to Jalen. "Get your sidearm." Auxiliary engineering was a dark, humming cavern of pipes and conduits. Kael'thas, the ship's chief engineer and one of the oldest Kurai survivors, stood by a coolant regulator. He was an elder. His skin faded to a pale gray, his neural tendrils withered. He had been Virella's advisor since she reclaimed the ship. He didn't run when they entered. He stood there, wiping grease from his hands with a rag, looking at them with sad, tired eyes. Virella stopped 10 paces from him. Jalen stood at her shoulder, his hand resting on the butt of his pistol. "Why?" Virella asked. Her voice was not loud. It was barely a whisper. "You raised me, Kael'thas. You taught me the history of our people." "I taught you history," the old alien said, his voice raspy. "I did not teach you to pollute it." He looked at Jalen with a sneer of absolute disgust. "You bring this mammal onto our holy vessel," Kael'thas spat. "You let him touch the command interface. You let him touch you." "He saved this ship," Virella said, stepping forward. "He saved us." "He is the enemy," Kael'thas roared, slamming his hand against the console. "They butchered us. Virella! They glassed our worlds, and now you lay with one? You would merge our royal bloodline with the very filth that tried to exterminate us?" "He is not them," Virella said. "He is different." "There are no good humans," Kael'thas shouted. "I sent the coordinates. I wanted the Imperium to destroy us. Better to die pure Virella than to live as a mongrel pet to a human stray." The silence that followed was suffocating. Virella looked at the old man. She looked at the mentor who had fed her when she was starving, who had kept the old stories alive. And she saw the hatred that had consumed him. It was the same hatred she had fought in herself. She realized then that she could not build a future with the ghosts of the past. "You speak of purity," Virella said softly. "But you are the one who betrayed your blood." She didn't use a weapon. She moved with the blurring speed of a royal kurai. She crossed the distance in a heartbeat. Her hand lashed out, her fingers forming a spear hand strike. Her hand punched through Keltis's chest plating. It went straight into his primary heart. The old kurai gasped, his eyes going wide. He looked down at her arm buried in his chest, then up at her face. "Traitor," Virella whispered, tears streaming down her face even as her eyes burned with fury. She ripped her hand back. Keltis crumpled to the deck, dead before he hit the metal. Virella stood over him, her hand dripping with violet blood. She was shaking. It wasn't the adrenaline of battle this time. It was the shattering of her soul. She had just killed the last link to her father. Jalen stepped forward. He didn't say a word. He didn't offer platitudes. He simply took her bloody hand in his and held it. Virella turned to him. She looked at the blood on her hand, then at Jalen's face. "The past is dead," she said, her voice hollow. "We have only the war now." "No," Jalen said, squeezing her hand tight enough to hurt. "We have the future, and we are going to win it." Virella looked down at the corpse of her mentor, then back to the human who held her. She took a shuddering breath, the steel returning to her spine. "Clean this up," she ordered the security team that had just arrived, "and set a course for the capital." She walked out of engineering without looking back, leaving a trail of violet droplets on the deck plates. The sensors of the Ethel Guard painted a picture of absolute doom. It was not just a fleet, it was a wall of metal and fire. The traitors within the Imperium had called in every debt, every favor, and every reserve unit. Over 500 warships hung in the void of the Arcanis sector, arranged in a spherical kill box around the Kurai Dreadnought. There were heavy cruisers with prow-mounted railguns, sleek frigates designed for wolf-pack tactics, and 3 Titan-class carriers launching swarms of bombers that looked like gnats against the backdrop of the distant stars. On the bridge, the silence was heavier than the gravity plating. The crew, loyal to the end, stood at their stations, their hands hovering over controls that could no longer save them. They were waiting for the order to die. Virella Kai sat on her throne, her spine rigid, her hands gripping the armrest so tightly the metal groaned. She was not looking at the tactical display. She was looking at Jalen Reeve. Jalen stood by the holotable, his face pale, illuminated by the red ghost light of the enemy fleet positions. He looked tired, not just sleep-deprived, but soul-weary. "We cannot fight this," Jalen said. His voice was low, steady, devoid of the panic that was currently screaming through the ship's neural network. "They have overlapping shield harmonics. Even with the singularity drive, we cannot punch a hole big enough to jump through before they slag us." "We do not need a hole," Virella said. Her voice was cold, sharp as a scalpel. "We use their mass against them. The combined gravity shadow of 500 ships creates a distortion in the fabric of real space, a graviton ripple." She stood up, her robe swirling around her ankles. "We override the safety protocols on the warp core," she continued, her eyes burning with a manic intensity. "We invert the field. Instead of pushing against space, we pull, we ride the ripple straight into the heart of the gravity well. It will catapult us past them, directly to the coordinates of the capital." Jalen stared at her. "That is suicide. An inverted warp jumps inside a gravity well?" The sheer tidal forces will tear this ship apart. We will arrive as dust. It is a chance, Varela snapped. It is better than waiting here to be dissected. Is it? Jalen countered. He walked around the table, closing the distance between them. Look at the numbers. Varela, even if we make the jump, we arrive at the capital with our shields stripped and our hull fractured. We arrive defenseless. We arrive armed with the truth, she said. They won't listen to the truth if we are dead, Jalen shouted. The sudden volume made the bridge crew flinch. There is another way. We power down weapons. We broadcast a surrender signal on all channels. We force a public arrest. If they take us into custody, we get a trial. We get a platform. We can expose the null pulse evidence to the entire galaxy from a courtroom floor. The air in the bridge seemed to freeze. Varela looked at him as if he had just spoken in a language made of sludge. She walked up to him slowly. Her movements were fluid, predatory. Surrender? She whispered. The word hung in the air between them. You want me to power down? You want me to let them board this ship? You want me to let them put chains on my wrists again? I want you to live, Jalen pleaded, reaching out to take her hand. Varela, please. This is the only tactical play that keeps you breathing. We can fight the legal battle. We can... Crack. The sound of the slap echoed through the cavernous bridge like a gunshot. Jalen's head snapped to the side. The force of the blow was immense, enhanced by Kurai muscle density. He stumbled back, tasting blood in his mouth. He looked back at her. Varela stood with her hand raised, her chest heaving. Her eyes were wide, not with regret, but with a fury so white-hot it looked like madness. You would kneel? She screamed. After all they did to us, after the cages, after they carved the skin from my body, would you trust their laws? I am trying to save you, Jalen yelled back, the anger finally breaking through his calm. You are trying to make me human, she accused, stepping into his space, her finger jabbing into his chest. That is your solution to everything. Compromise, submit, survive at the cost of your soul. You are too human, Jalen. You think life is just about breathing. You think survival is the only victory. And you are blind. Jalen grabbed her wrist, stopping her from striking him again. You are so terrified of being hurt again that you are running headfirst into a grave just to prove you are strong. You aren't making this call because it is strategic. You are making it because you are afraid. Varela froze. Afraid? She hissed. Yes. You are afraid to trust anyone, even me. You are afraid that if you stop fighting for 1 second, you will crumble. You are afraid to live. Varela. You are afraid to love because love requires you to be vulnerable. And you would rather die a martyr than live as a woman who needs help. The words hit her harder than the slap had hit him. She yanked her wrist free, her breathing ragged. The bioluminescence on her skin flared erratically, flashing violent shades of violet and red. For a moment, Jalen thought she might kill him. Her hand drifted toward the sidearm on her belt. The bridge crew watched, paralyzed, witnessing a domestic dispute that would determine the fate of civilizations. Then, the fury in her eyes cracked. Underneath the rage, Jalen saw the terror he had named. He saw the little girl in the cage. I will not go back to the dark, she whispered, her voice trembling. I will not let them touch me again. I would rather burn this ship and everyone on it than let them own me. Jalen wiped the blood from his lip. He looked at the woman he loved, standing on the edge of the abyss. He realized then that logic would not reach her. Only faith would. Then we don't go back, Jalen said softly. We jump. Varela blinked, caught off guard by his sudden shift. What? You want to ride the graviton ripple? Jalen turned to the navigation console. Fine, but you can't do it alone. The calculations require micro-adjustments every nanosecond. You need a co-pilot who knows how to surf gravity well. He looked back at her. I am not leaving you, Virella. If we burn together. But we are doing it my way. I fly, you manage the core, and we don't die today. Virella stared at him. The anger drained away, leaving a raw, exposed confusion. She saw the bruise forming on his cheek where she had struck him. She saw the absolute resolve in his eyes. You are a fool, she whispered, tears pooling in her indigo eyes. I am yours, he corrected. He sat in the pilot's chair and jacked the neural cable into his skull. Stations, Virella barked, her voice returning to the iron command tone of the Dreadnought's master. Disable safeties on the singularity core. Invert the warp field. Prepare for high-velocity transitions. She sat on her throne, linking her mind to the ship. The connection slammed into place. This time, there was no gentle merging. It was a collision of two storms. Jalen felt her shame over hitting him. She felt his forgiveness. He felt her terror. She felt his determination. They were two minds in conflict, still arguing, still hurting, yet their bodies and their wills locked into a perfect, terrifying rhythm. Initiating sequence, Jalen thought, his hands flying over the manual controls. Outside, the Alliance fleet opened fire. Thousands of turbo-laser beams converged on the Ethel Guard. Now! Virella screamed in his mind. Jalen threw the throttle forward. Virella inverted the core. The universe screamed. The jump was not instantaneous. It was a dragging, tearing agony. The Ethel Guard did not slip into null space. It grabbed the fabric of real space and crunched it. The gravity of the 500 enemy ships was seized, twisted, and used as a slingshot. Inside the ship, the laws of physics broke down. Up became red. Down became the smell of burning copper. Jalen felt his bones vibrating at a frequency that threatened to liquefy them. He felt Virella holding the ship together by sheer force of will, her mind wrapping around the hull plates like a shield. Hold on, she broadcasted, her presence wrapping around his consciousness. I have you. I'm not letting go, he answered. They accelerated past the speed of light without entering the warp dimension. They became a streak of impossible mass, a comet made of anger and technology. Then, abruptly, the screaming stopped. They slammed back into normal space with a boom that shattered satellites. Report, Jalen gasped, slumping forward in his chair, blood dripping from his nose. We have arrived, the sensor officer whispered, his voice trembling. Jalen looked at the main screen. They were not in deep space. They were in low orbit. Below them, filling the entire view, was Terra Prime, the throne world of the Imperium, a planet entirely encased in city sprawl, glowing with the golden light of trilithium power grids. And directly ahead, floating above the orbital elevators, was the Imperial High Command Station, a massive ring structure that served as the brain of the galaxy. The Ethel Guard hung above it, dwarfing the station. The Dreadnought was scarred, its hull scorched black from the jump, venting plasma into the void. But it was alive, and it was aiming every weapon it had at the Council. Imperial Command is hailing us, the comms officer said. Or, they are trying to. Their network is flooded with panic signals. They are scrambling everything. The planetary defense grid is trying to lock on, but we are too close. If they fire, the debris will rain down on the capital city. Good, Virella said. She stood up, wiping sweat and blood from her face. She looked regal, terrifying, and beautiful. Open a channel, wideband. Override the planetary media grid. I want every screen, every datapad, and every holovid on that planet to see me. Channel open. the officer confirmed. Varela stepped into the holographic projection circle. Her image, 10 stories tall, appeared in the skies above the capital city, projected by the Dreadnought's emitters. "People of Terra," she began. Her voice was not the shriek of a conqueror. It was the calm, measured tone of a judge. "I am Varela Kai, daughter of the Kurai, commanded by blood to avenge the dead. You look up at my ship and you see a monster. You see a weapon, but you do not see the monster that built it." Jalen watched her, his heart swelling with a painful mixture of pride and fear. She was magnificent. "I did not come to burn your world," she continued. "I came to return something you lost. Honor." The view screen shifted, broadcasting the data files Jalen and Varela had stolen. The genetic experiments, the blueprints for the null pulse, the orders signed by the High Council authorizing the genocide of the Kurai to harvest their DNA. "Your leaders are not protectors. They are butchers. They bred me in a lab to be a weapon. They built a device to silence entire sectors. They lied to you." The feed showed the schematics of the null pulse weapon, highlighting its indiscriminate kill radius. "I offer you a choice," Varela said, leaning into the camera. "I will lower my shields. I will stand down. But only if the Council surrenders. Only if the war criminals are handed over to face galactic justice. Only if the Kurai are recognized as a sovereign people, and every biological experiment is ended immediately." She paused. "Refuse, and I will not burn your city. I will simply release the evidence of what you have done to every colony, every outpost, and every ally you have. The Imperium will not die by my fire. It will die by its own shame." The transmission cut. "That," Jalen said, standing up and walking to her, "was a hell of a speech." Varela leaned against him, her strength fading. "Will they listen?" "The people will," Jalen said. "The Council. That is a different story." "Sir!" the tactical officer shouted. "Energy spike detected, massive scale. It is not coming from the station. It is coming from the moon's shadow." Jalen spun around. "Show me." On the dark side of Terra Prime's moon, a shape was emerging. It was not a ship. It was a platform. A floating gun the size of a small continent. It was the Titan-class siege platform the rumors had whispered about. The World Eater. "They were waiting for us," Jalen whispered. "The Council didn't panic," Varela realized, her face going pale. "They baited us. They let us jump here so they could use the World Eater without risking their fleet." "Energy signature rising," the computer droned. "Target lock. The Ethel Guard. Weapon type, null pulse cannon. Warning, warning. This weapon is capable of destabilizing molecular bonds on a planetary scale." "They are going to fire a null pulse that big next to their own capital?" Jalen asked, horrified. "They have shielded the planet," Varela pointed out, gesturing to the golden grid lighting up the atmosphere below. "They will sacrifice the orbital station and everyone on it just to kill us. They are scrubbing the slate clean." "Time to impact?" Jalen asked. "The weapon is charging. 7 minutes to full capacity." Varela looked at her crew. "We cannot shield against that. A null pulse of that magnitude will turn this ship into a drifting tomb instantly." "We have to destroy it," Jalen said. "We have no firing angle," the tactical officer said. "The moon is blocking our line of sight. We would have to move around the planet, and by then, it will have fired." Jalen looked at the schematic of the World Eater. It was a glass cannon, huge offensive power, minimal point defense, relying on its stealth and range. "It has an exhaust port," Jalen said, pointing to the thermal vent on the schematic. "For the pulse generator, if you jam it, the feedback loop blows the weapon apart." "We cannot reach it with missiles," Varela said. No, Jalen said. He turned to her, a strange calmness settling over him. But a single fighter, moving fast enough, running cold, could get inside the shield perimeter. Varela grabbed his arm. No, absolutely not. It is the only play, Varela, Jalen said, covering her hand with his. You hold the position here. You keep the council terrified. You keep the planet's eyes on you. I take the prototype fighter. I slip past the moon's horizon. I jam the vent. You will never make it back, she whispered. The explosion radius. I am a good pilot. He smiled, a sad, crooked smile. Remember? Jalen, no. Tears spilled down her face. I just found you. Do not ask me to let you go. You said you wanted a future, Jalen said, his voice thick with emotion. This is how we buy it. If that weapon fires, there is no future. Not for us, not for the Karai, not for the galaxy. It's just silence. He kissed her forehead. It was a benediction. I love you, he whispered. Before she could stop him, he pulled away and sprinted for the hangar bay. Varela stood frozen for a second. She wanted to scream. She wanted to order the guards to stop him. But she was a queen, and a queen did not sacrifice her people to save her heart. She turned to the comms officer. Broadcast to the planet. Tell them. Tell them to look at the moon. Tell them to witness who saves them. The prototype fighter, the Void Needle, launched from the Ethel Guard like a bullet. Jalen didn't use the neural link this time. He needed his human reflexes. He needed the raw, unrefined instinct that had kept him alive in the scrap yards. He pushed the throttle past the red line. The G-force slammed him into the seat. I am crossing the Terminator line, he radioed, entering the moon's shadow. We see you. Varela's voice came over the comms. It was steady, but he could hear the break in it. Jalen, the World Eater has launched interceptor drones. I see them, Jalen said. The blackness of space around the massive weapon platform lit up with engine flares. Hundreds of automated kill drones swarmed toward him. Time to dance, Jalen muttered. He yanked the stick hard to the left, spinning the fighter through a gap between two asteroids. He fired his thrusters in short, erratic bursts, confusing the drone tracking algorithms. He was flying better than he had at the academy. He was flying better than he had in the war. He was flying for her. 3 minutes to weapon discharge, the computer warned. Jalen blasted a drone that crossed his path, flying through the debris cloud. The impact of shrapnel against his hull sounded like hail on a tin roof. I am taking fire, he shouted. Shields down to 20%. He could see the thermal vent now. It was a glowing red maw on the underside of the platform, pulsing with the buildup of lethal energy. I am lining up the run, Jalen said. Jalen. Varela's voice cut through the static. If you cannot do it, if you miss. I won't miss. If you miss, she continued, her voice terrifyingly calm. I am overriding the Dreadnought safety core. I will detonate the Ethel Guard. The explosion will intercept the null pulse before it hits the planet. I will not let them win. Jalen's blood froze. She was going to sacrifice herself. She was going to turn herself into a sun to block the shot. You will do no such thing, Jalen yelled. Do you hear me? Varela, you stay alive. That is an order. Then fly, human, she whispered. Fly. Jalen grit his teeth so hard he thought they would crack. He pushed the engines beyond their limit. The fighter screamed as the frame began to buckle under the stress. He dove toward the platform. The drones were thick as locusts now. Lasers scorched his fuselage. The canopy cracked. Target locked. The computer chimed. He was too close for missiles. They would be shot down. I have to drop the payload manually, Jalen realized. I have to get inside the vent. He ignored the alarms. He ignored the heat rising in the cockpit. He aimed for the center of the red glow. 1 minute to discharge. Jalen drove the void needle straight at the mouth of the beast. He saw the aperture opening. He saw the white light of the null pulse building up. For the future, he whispered. He fired his entire payload of plasma torpedoes directly into the open vent. And then, at the last possible second, he pulled up. The G-force blacked out his vision. Behind him, the torpedoes struck the exposed core of the weapon. The feedback loop was instantaneous. The World Eater did not fire. It convulsed. The energy backed up, tearing through the containment fields. From the bridge of the Ethelgard, Varela watched as a new star was born on the dark side of the moon. The explosion was silent, blinding, and absolute. The shockwave rippled out, vaporizing the drones, vaporizing the platform. "Jalen!" she screamed, gripping the console. "Jalen!" The radio was static. The explosion expanded, a sphere of white fire eating the dark. "Scan for his transponder," she ordered, her voice cracking. "Find him." "Scanning," the sensor officer said. "Interference is too high. There is nothing, my queen. No signal." Varela stood there, the light of the explosion reflecting in her eyes. She felt the connection in her mind, the faint, lingering warmth of his presence. Snap. It was gone. She sank to her knees on the bridge, the silence of the room deafening against the roar of her own breaking heart. The white fire of the null pulse feedback loop did not result in the silence of the grave, but rather the screaming of metal tearing itself apart at the molecular level. Jalen Reeve was alive. That was the first surprise. The cockpit of the Void Needle was no longer a cockpit. It was a crushed tin can of sparks and depressurization alarms. He was upside down, suspended by his harness, staring through a spiderweb of cracked transparasteel at a smoking hangar deck. He had not just bombed the vent, he had ridden the shockwave through the breach. Crashing the fighter directly into the internal docking bay of the World Eater just as the primary weapon coils detonated. He gasped, tasting copper and smoke. His left arm hung uselessly at his side, shattered. A shard of the instrument panel was embedded in his thigh, pinning him to the seat. "Varela!" he rasped, fumbling for the transmit switch with his good hand. Static. The explosion had fried the long-range comms, and he had to move. The platform was dying. Secondary explosions were rocking the superstructure, sending tremors through the deck that felt like the heartbeat of a dying giant. Jalen gritted his teeth and punched the emergency release on his harness. He fell, hitting the deck plating hard. The pain was a blinding white spike that nearly sent him back into unconsciousness. But he forced himself to breathe, in, out. Survive. He dragged himself out of the wreckage of the fighter. The hangar was in chaos. Automated fire suppression systems were spraying foam over burning loader drones. But amidst the smoke, he saw a blast door open. A figure stumbled out, flanked by 2 staggering stormtroopers. It was a high admiral, his white uniform scorched, his face a mask of soot and terror. He was heading for an escape shuttle. Jalen did not think. He pulled his sidearm from its holster. The weapon felt incredibly heavy. "Stop!" Jalen shouted. His voice was a wreck, but it carried the weight of command. The troopers raised their rifles, but they were slow, concussed. Jalen fired twice. 2 bolts of plasma took them in the chest, dropping them. The High Admiral froze. He looked at the human scavenger limping toward him, blood soaking the leg of his flight suit, a pistol leveled at his head. "You," the Admiral whispered, recognizing the face from the wanted posters. "Reeve, you are dead." "I get that a lot," Jalen growled. He kept the gun steady, though his vision was swimming. "Step away from the shuttle." The platform is collapsing, the Admiral shrieked, his composure fracturing. We have to leave. You have doomed us all. I disabled the weapon, Jalen said, stepping closer. The core is gone. The rest of this station will hold together long enough for gravity to pull it apart slowly. But you are not going anywhere. You would kill me, the Admiral sneered, trying to find some shred of dignity. Go ahead, traitor, shoot me. No, Jalen said. He reached his belt and unclipped a set of magnetic binders. He threw them at the Admiral's feet. Put them on. My commander wants justice, not a corpse. The Admiral stared at the cuffs. The Kurai bitch will skin me alive. She is a queen, Jalen corrected, his voice hard as iron. And she is better than you will ever be. Put them on. The Admiral hesitated. Jalen cocked the pistol. Defeated. The Imperial officer knelt and locked the binders around his wrists. Jalen slumped against a bulkhead, his adrenaline fading, leaving only the cold tide of shock. He looked at the ceiling, wondering if the sensors of the Ethelguard could penetrate the interference. Virella, he whispered to the empty air. I promised. The world began to gray at the edges. The pain in his leg was a distant throb now. He slid down the wall, sitting on the deck. He kept the gun pointed at the Admiral, but his eyes were getting heavy. Then, the air in the hangar changed. The smell of ozone and burning plastic was replaced by a sudden, sharp scent of cinnamon and static charge. A column of violet light tore through the roof of the hangar, disregarding the shielding, disregarding the structural integrity. It slammed into the deck 3 meters from Jalen. When the light faded, Virella Kai was there. She was not wearing armor. She was barefoot, dressed only in her bridge robes, her hair wild, her eyes glowing with a terrified ferocity. She held a rifle that looked too big for her, scanning the room. She saw the Admiral. She saw the dead troopers. And then she saw Jalen. Jalen! The scream ripped from her throat, raw and primal. She dropped the rifle and sprinted across the debris-strewn deck. She skidded to her knees beside him, her hands hovering over his body, afraid to touch him, afraid to cause more pain. I got him, Jalen whispered, gesturing vaguely at the Admiral with his gun hand before the weapon clattered to the floor. The bad guy. Got him. You idiot, Virella sobbed, pulling him into her arms. Her skin was glowing so brightly it illuminated the dark hangar. Her tears fell onto his face, mixing with the soot and blood. You noble, stupid idiot. The weapon? Jalen asked, his eyes struggling to focus on her face. Destroyed, she said, pressing her hands against the wound in his leg, trying to staunch the flow. You saved them. You saved everyone. Good, Jalen mumbled. Tired now. No! Virella grabbed his face, forcing him to look at her. No sleeping! You promised me a future. Do not you dare die, Jalen Reeve. Do not you dare leave me here alone. The darkness was rushing in now, like a tide rising. But through the cold, he felt her warmth. He felt the connection in his mind flickering back to life. Flashback. He was 22. The garden. The smell of synthetic roses. A blue hand reaching out, trembling. Why are you helping me? Because you are not a monster. Reality. Stay with me. Virella's voice was a command, echoing in his skull. Flashback. The bath chamber. The steam rising. Her voice, low and husky. You should never be ashamed. The way the light caught the curve of her spine. The sudden overwhelming realization that he wanted her not as a savior, but as a man. Reality. He felt the hum of the teleportation beam locking on. He felt her arms tightening around him, holding him together. I choose you, she whispered, her forehead pressed against his. I choose you over the war. I chose you over the past. Breathe, Jalen. Breathe. Flashback. The kiss in the cryo chamber. The merging. The feeling of two souls becoming one star. The absolute certainty that he had found his home. Home, Jalen whispered. The violet light took them. The medical bay of the Ethel Guard was a war zone of activity. Drones whirred, lasers stitched, and Kurai medics worked with a desperate efficiency. Virella stood on the other side of the glass partition. She had refused to leave. She watched as they restarted his heart, twice. She watched as they removed the shrapnel. She watched as they grafted synthetic muscle to his leg and shoulder, using the same technology that had once been used to torture her. When the monitor finally settled into a steady, rhythmic beep, Virella slumped against the glass. She slid down until she was sitting on the floor, hugging her knees to her chest. She did not cry. She simply breathed, syncing her rhythm to the monitor. He was alive. 3 days later, Jalen Reeve woke up. He was weak, and his body felt like it had been reassembled by a committee of blind engineers. But he was lucid. Virella was there. She was sitting in a chair beside the bio bed, reading a data pad. She looked exhausted, but when he stirred, her head snapped up. "Hey," he croaked. She didn't smile. She stood up, leaned over the bed, and kissed him. It was a fierce, possessive kiss that told him everything he needed to know about the last 72 hours. "You are never flying a fighter again," she said when she pulled back. "I am grounding you." "Understood." Jalen smiled weakly. "How is the war?" "Over," she said. She helped him sit up. She activated the wall screen. "Oh, watch." The screen showed a recording from the previous day. It was Virella, standing on the observation deck of the Ethel Guard, with the blue sphere of Terra Prime in the background. She looked regal, her neural tendrils glowing with a calm, golden light. "Citizens of the galaxy," the recorded Virella spoke. "The weapon known as the World Eater is destroyed. The High Council attempted to silence us, and in doing so, they nearly silenced themselves." The camera panned to show the captured admiral, kneeling in chains, flanked by Kurai guards. "This is Admiral Vance. He has confessed to the deployment of the Null Pulse. He has confessed to the genocide orders. He will not be executed. He will be delivered to the Galactic Court on Centauri Prime to stand trial." She stepped closer to the camera. "The Kurai do not seek an empire. We do not seek to replace one tyrant with another. We seek only our home, our sovereignty, and our peace." She gestured to the massive Dreadnought behind her. "This ship was built for vengeance, but today, I dedicate it to protection. The Ethel Guard will remain in orbit, not as a jailer, but as a shield. We will enforce the Treaty of Centauri. We will ensure that no biological weapons are ever forged again. We offer an alliance, not of masters and servants, but of equals." The recording ended. Jalen looked at Virella. "They bought it?" "The people did," Virella said. "The streets of the capital are filled with protesters. The military has fractured. Half the fleet has defected to the alliance. The council has barricaded themselves in the spire. But their power is gone. They are ruling over a ghost." She sat on the edge of the bed, taking his hand. "We won." "Jalen," without burning the world, Jalen squeezed her hand. "And us?" "The Kurai Council has been reconstituted," she said with a dry smile. "With Kael'thas gone, the younger generation is eager for change. They have acknowledged my claim, and they have acknowledged my choice of consort." Jalen raised an eyebrow. "Consort? Is that what I am now?" "You are the man who disabled a planet killer with a retrofitted fighter," she said softly. You can be whatever you want, but I hope you will be mine. Always, Jalen said. Recovery was slow. The galaxy did not heal overnight, and neither did Jalen. The Imperium collapsed in stages. First the outer sectors, declaring independence. Then the trade guilds. Finally, the core worlds forced the resignation of the High Council. A provisional government was formed, one that included representatives from the non-human species for the first time in 1,000 years. The Kurai were given the Othris sector, their ancestral home. It was a graveyard when they arrived, but with the terraforming tech from the Ethelgard and the aid of the new alliance, life began to return. Months turned into a year. Jalen spent his days in physical therapy, learning to trust the synthetic nerves in his leg. He spent his evenings in the archives, helping Varela draft the new constitution for her people. He watched her change. The sharp, terrified edges of the girl he had known softened. She stopped wearing the heavy combat armor. She began to incorporate human fashion into her wardrobe, softer fabrics, flowing lines. And she changed the crown. The heavy, jagged neural interface that had marked her as a warlord was gone. In its place was a simple ring of platinum and biocrystal, worn behind her ear, connecting to her neural tendrils. Jalen had designed it. It was sleek, efficient, and beautiful, a bridge between biology and technology. The final evening was warm. The twin moons of Othris Prime hung low in the sky, one silver, one a pale violet. Jalen stood on the balcony of the royal spire. Below him, the city was glowing, not with the harsh neon of the Imperium, but with the soft, bioluminescent light of Kurai architecture. It looked like a coral reef made of glass and light. He heard the door slide open behind him. The soft rustle of silk. Varela stepped out. She wore a dress of deep indigo that matched her eyes. Her skin shimmered in the moonlight. She came to stand beside him, leaning against the railing. "The delegation from Terra left an hour ago," she said. "They signed the final trade agreement. We are officially recognized." "It is done then," Jalen said, looking out at the city. "The war is really over." "The fighting is over," Varela corrected. "The building is just beginning." She turned to look at him. Her hand reached up to touch the gray at his temples. He looked older than when they had met on the dead moon, scarred and weathered, but his eyes were clear. The haunted look was gone. "Jalen," she said softly. He turned to face her. "Ask me," she whispered. "Ask you what?" "The question you have been afraid to ask since the day I took you from the dirt." Jalen looked at her. He knew what she meant. It was the question that had shadowed their entire journey. The doubt that Kelthus had planted, the fear that he was just a tool, a means to an end. He took a breath. "Was it all just revenge for you? In the beginning? Was I just a key to a lock you couldn't open?" Varela didn't look away. She didn't flinch. "Yes," she said. Honesty hung in the air. "In the beginning," she continued, stepping closer, "it was rage, it was survival. I needed a human to fight humans. I needed a pilot. I needed a weapon." She reached up and took his hand, placing it over her heart. He could feel the steady, powerful double beat. "But then," she whispered, her eyes shining with tears she didn't shed, "you flew backward into a swarm of drones to save my pilots. You stood in a bath chamber and looked at my scars without flinching. You jumped into a gravity well because you wouldn't let me die alone." She leaned in, her forehead resting against his. "It started as survival, Jalen. Then it became respect. Then it became love." She looked up at him, her face open, vulnerable, and utterly radiant. "I do not need a weapon anymore," she said. I just need you. Jalen smiled. It was a real smile, one that reached his eyes and stayed there. You have me, he said. You have always had me. He leaned down and kissed her. It wasn't the desperate collision of the cryo chamber, nor the frantic promise of the hangar bay. It was slow. It was quiet. It was the kiss of two people who had walked through fire and come out the other side holding hands. Above them, the Ethelgard hung in low orbit. For the first time in centuries, its weapons ports were closed, its engine hum powered down to a low, sleepy thrum. The violet runes along its hull dimmed, not fading away but settling into a steady, peaceful glow. The Dreadnought slept. The war was over, and under the light of the twin moons. The commander and the queen watched the stars bloom, ready to face the morning.